What if a single flower left on a forgotten bench was enough to wake a heart that hadn't felt anything in 3 years? What if a quiet act of kindness from a stranger began to mend what grief tried to keep broken forever? Nathaniel Pierce was a man defined by control, by glass towers, blueprints, and the silence that followed loss. He wasn't looking to be saved. He was just trying to forget. And then came Lila, a quiet woman with no agenda, no fame, no name, just wildflowers, gently left on a bench he once shared with the woman he loved and lost. What began as a habit turned into healing. What started as grief became something more. But when past and present collide, when the truth about Clara, the future of Greystone Park, and the secrets others would rather bury all come to light, can a man who spent his life building walls find the courage to let someone new in? Is it possible to honor love lost while daring to begin again? And what happens when the smallest gesture, a flower, blooms into something no one expected? If you've ever believed in the power of quiet connection, in second chances born from stillness, or in love that doesn't erase the past but grows beside it, like this video, share it with someone who needs that reminder, and subscribe to Shining Stories, because some stories don't begin with fireworks, they begin with flowers. Now, let's begin with a bench, a memory, and the woman who unknowingly gave both a reason to breathe again. She had no way of knowing what memories that bench carried. From the back seat of a quiet black sedan parked just beyond the walking path, Nathaniel Pierce observed the woman through the window, her hands careful, deliberate, as she set down a cluster of humble wildflowers. He'd seen her here more than once, enough times to make something in his chest stir, something he thought had long since gone still. Not many people knew what forget-me-not symbolized, but Clara did, and so did he. Nate, his driver, spoke gently. "If we don't leave now, you'll miss your appointment." Nathaniel's fingers hovered over his phone. A few taps, and this bench, her bench, could be made off limits. Instead, he slid the phone back into his coat pocket. "Call the office," he said. "Clear my schedule." The morning fog lingered over Greystone Park, wrapping the path and trees in a silvery hush. Lila Morgan, dressed in a worn, oversized sweater, stepped away from the bench beneath the old sycamore. Before she disappeared into the mist, she glanced back, not because she expected anything, but because some places hold a weight that makes you look twice. She didn't know anyone had been watching, didn't realize her small, quiet gesture had just reached into the heart of a man who had long since stopped believing in unexpected beauty. Every morning, just before heading to her job walking dogs around the city, Lila stopped at that bench. She never brought store-bought flowers, only wild ones. She didn't know the name of the woman whose name was etched into the metal plaque. She only knew that this spot felt safe, soft, in a way the city never was. She gave what she could, something living, something gentle, because she sensed the bench remembered someone, and memory deserved respect. Later, Nathaniel stepped out of his car. The polished leather of his shoes caught bits of damp leaves. His custom suit looked out of place here among the cracked stones, the overgrown roots, and the quiet. He moved slowly, then knelt by the bench. The flowers were still fresh, the kind Clara loved most. His hand brushed back a tangle of ivy to reveal the small bronze plaque in loving memory of Clara Whitmore. 3 years. He still couldn't say it out loud. 3 years since she'd died without warning, without goodbye. This bench had been their last place, their final conversation. It had become the only space where his grief was allowed to breathe. He picked up the forget-me-nots, and something shifted. A question took root. Who would know? Who would choose these flowers? Now. Of all times, he reached for his phone and called. "Rachel," he said quietly, "the flowers are back." There was a pause. Then her voice came through, clipped and slightly tense. Probably just city staff doing upkeep. "Listen, we really need your sign-off on the Greystone proposal. The partners are growing restless." Nathaniel didn't respond. His eyes stayed on the bench. The proposal would erase all of this. This bench, this tree, this fragment of memory. It would become polished stone, glass towers, and manicured walkways. a monument to forgetting. "I'm going to need more time," he said finally. Another pause, then Rachel's voice, softer now, the way it always turned when she was maneuvering. "Nate, Clara wouldn't want you holding on like this. Maybe it's time to let her go. It's been long enough." "Nate," Rachel said gently, her voice a practiced balance between compassion and persuasion. "Clara wouldn't want you frozen in time. This project, it could be your beginning again. A way to finally let her go." Nathaniel's fingers clenched around the small bouquet still resting in his hand, the edges of the petals pressed into his palm, but he said nothing of the sting. "I'll be at the office later," he replied curtly, and hung up before she could push further. Across town, in a glass-paneled office that overlooked the city skyline, Rachel Lynn set her phone down with a hollow click. Her manicured nails tapped rhythmically against the desk, betraying the irritation she tried so hard to hide. She opened a drawer, slowly, and pulled out a photo she rarely allowed herself to look at, a younger version of herself, standing beside Nathaniel at a company gala. She was smiling at him. He was looking elsewhere. Her eyes drifted to the blueprints stretched across her desk, the plans for Greystone Towers, the project she had poured herself into for years. With a swift, deliberate gesture, she folded the corner of the page, the part where that bench was drawn, as if, by creasing the paper just right, she could erase it from existence. 3 years is long enough," she whispered. The reflection in her office window showed a woman who had waited and waited too long. Her voice barely above breath. "It's my turn now." Later that day, Leela returned to the bench during her lunch break, clutching a new handful of wildflowers. But something was off. They were gone. The ones she had left that morning vanished. She looked around, puzzled. That's when she noticed the older woman sitting nearby, tossing breadcrumbs to a cluster of pigeons. "He took them," the woman said, "without being asked. A tall man, well-dressed. Looked like he belonged somewhere more important than a city park, but he seemed moved." Lila flushed with embarrassment. "I didn't think anyone noticed. I just thought it was something nice." The woman turned to her, eyes warm and knowing. "That bench matters, dear. Maybe more than you realize." Lila nodded awkwardly, murmured a thank you, and walked away quickly, unsure if she should even come back tomorrow. But her feet dragged, because something about that spot, about the silence beneath the sycamore, still called to her. It always had. The next morning, Nathaniel arrived earlier than usual. He stood quietly beneath the tree's low-hanging branches, watching, waiting, and then she came. Lila stepped onto the path with a fresh bouquet this time, soft white daisies. Nathaniel's breath caught slightly. There was something familiar in her, though he couldn't place it. "Excuse me," he said, stepping forward. Startled, Lila nearly dropped the flowers. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "If I've upset someone, I can stop. I didn't mean no." Nathaniel interrupted, gesturing toward the bench. "Please, I've just wondered who it was." She tilted her head, unsure. "The flowers," he said, softer now. "I've noticed them. They're wild, not store-bought. It's unusual." Lila looked down at her hands. "They're just flowers," she murmured. "Nothing fancy." He studied her for a long second. This wasn't someone who had known Clara. That much was clear. But still, here she was, bringing those flowers. "I'm Nathaniel Pierce," he said, offering his hand. "This bench, it belongs to someone I once loved." Lila blinked, then finally noticed the small plaque beneath the ivy. "Oh," she whispered. "I didn't realize. I'm so sorry. I can use another bench. Anywhere." "Really, please don't," Nathaniel said quickly, surprising himself. "I'd like to know what brought you to this one." She hesitated, then sat down slowly, placing the daisies carefully between them on the bench. "A year ago, maybe more. I passed this spot while walking a client's dog," she said quietly. "It just felt different, quiet, but not lonely, kind in a strange way." Her eyes dropped to the flowers. "This will sound silly," she added. her cheeks coloring, but it felt like the bench deserved them. Nathaniel didn't speak right away. In his world of skyscrapers and sharp suits, where every conversation had purpose and every smile had strategy, this woman had simply done something kind, without needing a reason. And somehow, that moved him more than he expected. They're just the kind she would have loved, Nathaniel murmured, more to himself than to her. Lila asked, her voice tentative. He turned to her, gentler now. Clara, my fiancée. She passed away 3 years ago. The words came easier than he'd expected, saying them aloud in this place, under this tree, beside someone who wasn't afraid of silence. It felt different, not easier, but less unbearable. Lila looked at him with quiet compassion. I'm sorry, she said, and she meant it not with pity, but with presence. He nodded, eyes tracing the grain of the wooden bench beneath them. This was our favorite spot, he said. She always said it felt like the world slowed down here. Neither of them noticed the sleek black car that had rolled to a stop at the park's edge, inside, behind tinted glass. Rachel watched. Nathaniel was smiling, not the tight, polished smile he wore in boardrooms, but a real one, a rare one, and it wasn't for her. Over the following 2 weeks, Nathaniel returned to the bench more often than he cared to admit, not only for Clara's memory, but in hopes of crossing paths with Lila again. And each time, she was there, always with flowers, always open, but never demanding. Their conversations began slowly, like stepping into cold water. A few words, then silence. But over time, the silence grew warm. Lila told him about her pet-sitting jobs, about the small apartment she shared with too many plants, and a long-held dream of opening a shelter for animals no one else wanted. Nathaniel listened, not just with his ears, but with something that had been dormant in him for years. There was no performance in her, no agenda, only honesty. One afternoon, while Baxter, the overexcited golden retriever Nathaniel rarely talked about, kept popping into his mind, he asked without thinking, "Would you be willing to look after my dog while I'm away on business next week?" Lila's face lit up. "You have a dog?" He chuckled. "Barely. He's more tornado than canine. Golden retriever." He added, "Boundless energy, no manners. My housekeeper usually helps, but she'll be visiting family." "I'd love to," Lila said, then caught herself. "I mean professionally, and of course." As a pet sitter, he smiled, pulled a business card from his wallet, wrote his address on the back and handed it to her. She read it: Skyline Terrace Penthouse, one of the city's most elite buildings. Her brows lifted slightly, but she didn't comment. Back at Pearson Lynn Development, Rachel wasn't smiling. She had seen the shift, in Nathaniel's tone, in his calendar, in the way he pushed back at meetings. During one investor call, she spoke up. "The preliminary work for Greystone Towers starts next month," she said briskly. "We'll need final authorization on demolition permits this week." Nathaniel looked up from the revised plans. "The northeast section isn't ready. We haven't incorporated the design revisions I requested." Rachel's expression didn't falter. "The engineers say that portion can't be preserved, not with the current scope." "Then we'll find different engineers," he said flatly. "That part of the park stays." After the meeting, she caught him in his office, door closed, voice low. "What's happening with you?" "Nate." Her tone was measured, but her knuckles were white around her tablet. "6 months ago, you were leading this project with full force. Now you're risking a multi-million-dollar development over a bench." Nathaniel looked at her, long and steady. "It's not just a bench." She hesitated. "Is this about that woman?" she asked. "The one who leaves the flowers?" He narrowed his eyes slightly. "I've seen you talking to her," Rachel added, her voice carefully neutral. "Her name is Lila," he said simply, "and she's not the reason I'm rethinking things." But even as he spoke, he wasn't sure that was entirely true. Rachel's voice softened, like velvet hiding steel. "Nathaniel, I'm genuinely concerned. First, it was Clara's memory you clung to. Now it's this flower girl in the park." She paused just long enough to let the words sink in. "It's not healthy." Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "I appreciate the concern," he replied coolly, "but my personal life has nothing to do with company affairs." That weekend, Lila stepped into Nathaniel's penthouse for the first time. She felt immediately out of place. Everything was immaculate, sleek lines, cool tones, nothing out of order. It didn't feel lived in. It felt preserved. He was finishing a business call in the next room, and she waited in silence. Her eyes wandered to a glass display filled with architectural awards, each one etched with dates and titles she didn't understand. She stepped back, just slightly bumping the edge of a side table. A silver photo frame wobbled, then tipped. "Oh no," she gasped, catching it just in time. In the photo, Nathaniel was sitting on a familiar bench, laughing beside a woman with striking eyes and windblown hair. The woman held a bouquet forget-me-nots, Queen Anne's lace, and soft white daisies. Exactly what Lila had been leaving. "That's Clara," Nathaniel said quietly, having ended his call just in time to see the moment unfold. "She was beautiful," Lila said sincerely. "And she loved wildflowers, not just loved them." He replied, "She said they were honest. They grow where they're not supposed to, and still manage to bloom. She admired that." Just then, a flash of fur burst into the room. Baxter, golden, goofy, and thrilled to see a new face. He immediately flopped over for a belly rub. Lila laughed, sinking to the floor beside him. Nathaniel watched from the doorway, something softening in his posture. He found himself telling her more than he meant to, how he and Clara had met at a sustainability conference, where she'd challenged one of his firm's most ambitious proposals, how she'd seen beauty in spaces most developers wanted to pave over, how she'd made him question everything. "She sounds like someone who really knew who she was," Lila said, stroking Baxter's ear. "She did," Nathaniel answered, his voice low. "That's what I admired most." In the days that followed, as Lila cared for Baxter while Nathaniel was away, she found herself observing more than the dog. The apartment, though stunning, felt frozen in time. No books, no music, no warmth. Aside from the few photos of Clara, there was nothing that hinted at who Nathaniel was, only what he'd built. Before leaving on the final day, Lila placed a small vase of wildflowers on the kitchen counter. Beside it, a handwritten note. "For making your home feel a little more like your bench. Peaceful. Lila." Later that night, Nathaniel called. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." He invited her for coffee. She agreed. That coffee turned into lunch. Lunch turned into walks with Baxter through Greystone Park. And somewhere between the conversations and the quiet, something unspoken began to grow. He noticed things again, a bee dancing on a clover, the sound of wind moving through trees, and Lila always noticing the small things. One afternoon, she said, as they watched a patch of wild grass sway between sidewalk cracks. "Sometimes I think the tiniest things carry the most weight, like flowers that push through concrete. They don't ask permission. They just become..." Her words didn't just reach him. They unsettled something and softened it. That night, Nathaniel skipped a dinner with potential investors. Instead, he sat in his living room, looking through old photos of Clara, not with guilt, but with gratitude. He realized something had shifted. He wasn't letting go of Clara. He was making space beside her memory. Rachel had been watching it all unfold, each smile, each pause in Nathaniel's calendar, each shift in his tone during meetings. She recognized the signs. He was slipping, from the man she'd built the project with, to someone who now questioned its very foundation. At the latest design review, Nathaniel proposed sweeping changes, more trees, community gardens, open green spaces, ideas Clara would have fought for. Worst of all, in Rachel's eyes, he was now insisting on preserving the northeast corner of Greystone Park, the part with the bench. After he shot down a cost-cutting suggestion that would have increased the building's carbon footprint, Rachel made a choice. She needed to regain control, and she knew exactly where to start. It happened to look like coincidence, running into Lila on the edge of the park as she walked a pair of golden retrievers back to their owner. Rachel approached with practiced warmth. "You must be Lila," she said, her tone light. I'm Rachel. I work closely with Nathaniel. Lila smiled politely, but warily. He's been through a lot. You know, Rachel continued, her voice just the right shade of sympathy. Clara's death nearly destroyed him. We were all so concerned. Lila shifted uncomfortably. Rachel pressed on. The hardest part has always been the guilt. Guilt, Lila echoed, confused. Rachel widened her eyes just enough to suggest regret. Oh, I thought he told you. She paused long enough to let the silence fill with uncertainty. There was an accident, she said softly. They argued. Clara wanted to delay the wedding. Nathaniel was driving. It all happened so fast. She trailed off, as if the details were too painful to recount. That's why he clings to this park, why he's driven to transform it. He's trying to rewrite something he can't forget. Lila's heart pounded. Nathaniel's planning to demolish this place, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rachel tilted her head slightly. The development's been in motion for years. Construction begins next month. Then, with a sheepish smile, please don't mention I said anything. He's incredibly private. I shouldn't have said a word. She left before Lila could respond, leaving behind a mind full of shadows. That evening, Nathaniel called. He asked if she'd like to have dinner. She declined. Her voice was gentle, but distant. She mentioned last-minute work, a full client list, over the next week. Lila's messages grew shorter. Her visits to the bench stopped. When Nathaniel called, her voice was always polite but never quite present. Something was wrong, and he felt it. One morning, earlier than usual, he went to the bench, not for Clara, not even for himself. He just hoped she'd be there. And she was. But everything about her was different. She approached slowly, shoulders drawn in, face downcast. The flowers she held were tucked against her chest like a burden. She placed them on the bench quick, mechanical. Gone was the grace, the intention. Lila. He called gently. She froze, then straightened. I didn't expect you, she said. You've been avoiding me. Nathaniel replied. Did I do something wrong? Lila didn't answer right away. She smoothed the petals with unnecessary care. I think I crossed a line, she said at last. This place, these flowers, they belong to someone else. I shouldn't have made it mine. Nathaniel stepped closer. That's not why you've been distant. Something in her gaze trembled. I met Rachel. She admitted. She told me about the accident, the guilt, the plans for this park. I understand now why this place is complicated. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. What exactly did she say about Clara? But before Lila could answer, the sharp rhythm of heels on gravel interrupted them. The sharp sound of heels against the stone path sliced through the moment like a blade. Rachel emerged from the trees, dressed in tailored confidence, clutching a sleek leather portfolio embossed with the Pierce and Lynn Development logo. Nathaniel. She called, her voice bright and polished. I've been trying to track you down all morning. Her smile wavered slightly when she saw Lila beside him. We need your approval on the demolition permits. The contractors are preparing to break ground next week. Lila blinked in disbelief. Next week, she asked. Already Nathaniel's gaze shifted between the two women. Pieces were falling into place. I never signed off on that timeline, he said slowly. Rachel opened her portfolio with practiced poise, flipping to a page. Actually, she said, tapping a spot with her manicured nail. You did. Right here. You agreed it was time to move forward, for your own sake. Lila stepped back. The air had grown thick, heavy. I should go, she whispered. Lila, wait. Nathaniel reached out, but she was already walking away, fast, the flowers in her hand, trailing petals behind her. Rachel placed a gentle hand on his arm. Let her go, she murmured. She's clouding your judgment. The board is already worried. Nathaniel pulled away. His voice dropped to steel. Call an emergency board meeting this afternoon and bring every piece of documentation on Greystone. That afternoon, in the glass-walled boardroom high above the city. Nathaniel stood alone at the head of the table. Behind him, the skyline stretched wide and gray. Rachel sat rigid across from him, flanked by shareholders and senior executives. She didn't flinch, but she didn't smile either. Nathaniel spoke clearly, calmly. Clara Whitmore did not die in an accident. She passed away from a heart condition no one saw coming. There was no argument, no crash, no guilt. He turned to Rachel. There was only grief. And you used it. He tapped a remote, and the screen behind him shifted to revised architectural renderings. These are updated plans for Greystone ones that include preservation of the northeast quadrant, just as Clara would have wanted. One of the older board members leaned forward. These look feasible, he said slowly. Why were we told otherwise? Nathaniel didn't hesitate. Because Rachel manipulated the process, he said, voice clipped. She pushed through a demolition schedule without proper authorization. She withheld alternate designs, and she deliberately interfered in my personal life to keep this project on her terms. Rachel stood. That's not true, she snapped. Everything I did for this company and for you. Nathaniel didn't blink. You did it for control. You were stuck. Nate. Lost in grief for 3 years. This was supposed to be your restart. The future. A future I didn't ask for. He replied, you rewrote Clara's story. You lied to Lila because you saw her as a threat. Rachel's composure cracked. She was a threat. She hissed. She was filling your head with nonsense. Parks, preservation just like Clara. Silence fell. Even Rachel seemed to realize what she just said. Nathaniel's voice dropped low. I've made my decision. He turned to the board. We're pulling out of the Greystone Towers project, effective immediately. I'm recommending we pivot our firm's focus towards sustainable development, real green spaces, community-driven projects. A wave of murmurs swept the room. A man near the end of the table frowned. You want us to walk away from $50 million? Nathaniel met his eyes. I want us to return to the reason this company was founded in the first place, to create spaces that serve people, not erase them. We can, Nathaniel said firmly, and we will. He looked around the boardroom at every face staring back at him. This company was built to serve communities, not erase them. It's time we honored that mission again. Then he turned toward Rachel. Ms. Lynn, he said, his voice steady. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. Security will assist you in gathering your things. For the first time in the meeting, Rachel's composure cracked. As she rose, her voice shook somewhere between desperation and disbelief. I've stood beside you for years, she said, searching his face. I was there when Clara died. Not like some stranger who drops off flowers and thinks that's love. But Nathaniel didn't flinch. You weren't standing beside me, he said quietly. You were standing by, waiting for me to become the version of myself you could control. He turned away before she could answer. After the meeting, he tried calling Lila, straight to voicemail. He texted, nothing. For 3 days, he visited their bench at different times, morning, afternoon, evening. Each time, the wooden slats remained bare, no flowers. On the 4th day, he brought his own, a small bundle of forget-me-nots, the first he'd picked himself since Clara's memorial. He sat down, alone, and let his fingers trail along the bronze plaque beneath the ivy. Clara Whitmore. He could still hear her laugh in the breeze, still feel her quiet defiance when she'd spoken out at that council meeting, still remember her words. Don't build over beauty, build with it. I miss you, he whispered. Then, after a pause, but I think you'd like her. Lila sees the world the way you did. She notices things most people overlook. A soft voice came from behind him. Did you mean that he turned? Lila stood a few steps away, bouquet in hand. She looked unsure, but not afraid. Every word, Nathaniel said, rising to his feet. Rachel lied to you, Lila. She twisted things. None of what she said was true. I know, Lila replied softly. After I left that day, something didn't sit right. So I looked into it myself. She stepped forward. I found Clara's obituary. It said she passed from a heart condition. Quietly. There was no mention of an accident, no guilt to carry. Nathaniel's shoulders dropped, the weight of silence lifting between them. Why didn't you call me? He asked. Lila glanced at the bench. because I wasn't sure where I belonged anymore. This place, it holds so much of your past, and I didn't know if there was room for me in that story. Nathaniel shook his head gently. I canceled the project, he said. Greystone Park stays as it is. No development, no demolition. Leela's eyes widened, but Rachel said it was worth millions. He smiled soft, knowing. Some things matter more than money. Clara taught me that, and so did you. He gestured toward the bench between them. May I? She nodded, and they sat side by side. Her wildflowers mingled with his in the space between them. After a moment, Lila spoke. I never told you why I kept coming to this bench. He waited. It wasn't because it was pretty or peaceful. It was because every time I sat here, I felt less alone. It felt like healing. Even before I knew why. Nathaniel looked over at her, heart full. That's exactly why Clara loved it too. In the weeks that followed, something gentle began to grow again this time, without shadows. Nathaniel shared more than he ever had. He told Lila about Clara's advocacy, her fight to preserve urban green spaces, and her dream of reshaping the field of architecture into something more human. As they walked Baxter through the golden light of early autumn, he said quietly, She would have liked you. Lila smiled. Because I leave wildflowers. No, he said, his eyes warm. Because you remind people how to see the world again. Not just because you leave the same flowers, Nathaniel said, his voice warm and thoughtful, but because you see the world the way Clara did. You notice beauty where most people never think to look. Lila smiled. For the first time in years, she felt entirely at ease in her own skin. I wish I could have met her, she whispered. In a way, he said gently, you already have. This bench, this park, they exist because of her. In the months that followed, Nathaniel quietly shifted the direction of his company. He launched the Clara Whitmore Initiative for Sustainable Design, focusing on projects that blended green spaces with community needs instead of replacing them. At first, the board was hesitant, but public support was overwhelming. Clients responded. The vision caught fire. One evening, while the sun dipped low behind the sycamores, casting golden light over the familiar bench, Nathaniel turned to Lila. I've been thinking, he said, what if we opened a little cafe right at the entrance of the park? Layla blinked. Surprised. A cafe. A place where people could gather, he explained. Enjoy the quiet. Maybe learn about environmental design. Something small. Something that fits. Lila looked at him, then out across the lawn. That sounds lovely, she said. But I don't know the first thing about running a cafe. I don't either, he admitted with a grin. But I know business, and you know how to make people feel at home. They sat there in silence for a moment, the idea gently rooting itself in both of them. Together, he added, we might just make something meaningful. 6 months later, Clara's Grove Cafe opened its doors, a bright, airy space nestled beside Greystone Park, its windows looking out over the preserved green space that had once hung in the balance. Inside, wildflowers stood in handmade vases on each table. Lila tended to them every morning. Nathaniel greeted guests, sharing the story of the park's transformation, one cup of coffee at a time. The cafe quickly gained a reputation for its serenity, its environmental values, and a small, sunlit corner dedicated to community projects. A jar for heart health research sat quietly beside the register. Photographs of the park through every season lined the walls. On the anniversary of the day they first met, they closed early. With a hand-picked bouquet daisies, forget-me-nots, Queen Anne's lace, they returned to their bench, just as the sky began to blush pink. But someone was already there. Rachel. She rose quickly when she saw them approaching, her posture unsure, no longer the woman who walked with steel in her step. I was just leaving, she said quietly. It's a public bench, Leela replied gently. You're welcome here, just like anyone else. Rachel's eyes flicked to their hands, intertwined, and then to the flowers in Nathaniel's grasp. I heard about the cafe, she said. It's beautiful. Clara would have approved. Thank you, Nathaniel answered. His voice was calm, measured, not unkind. Rachel opened her mouth, hesitated, then finally spoke. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," she said. "For all of it, the lies, the pressure. I told myself it was for your sake, but it wasn't. It was for mine." She took a breath, steadier this time. "I've accepted a position with a firm in Portland. They focus on green urban design. I think I need to learn how to build instead of control." Nathaniel nodded. "That sounds like a good step." As Rachel turned and walked away, Leela squeezed his hand. "That was generous of you," she said. He looked at her and smiled softly. "Not generous," he said. "Just not cruel. There's a difference. Together." They sat down and placed their bouquet in the same spot where, once upon a time, each had left flowers alone, not knowing that one day they would return together. The bronze plaque on the old bench shimmered in the late afternoon sun, freshly polished, lovingly restored. Beside it, a second, smaller plaque had been placed. It read, "Where memories meet new beginnings." A year had passed since the park was saved, and Greystone had never looked more alive. The local community, once uncertain, had rallied behind the space. New walking paths curved through native grasses. A children's garden bloomed with laughter. An open-air stage hosted music and poetry beneath the stars. And at its quiet heart, the bench remained unchanged. Clara's Grove Cafe had grown from an idea into a neighborhood favorite. Its glass windows looked out onto the same tree where Lila once left her first wildflowers. Now, those flowers rested in vases on every table. The cafe hosted monthly environmental workshops and offered a gathering place for local artists, teachers, and families. It wasn't just a business. It was a shared story, one written by two people who had found each other, not in grand gestures, but in small, honest moments. Nathaniel brought structure. Lila brought soul. Together, they had built something neither could have done alone. On a crisp autumn morning, a silver-haired woman sipped her tea at the cafe counter, watching Nathaniel arrange pastries while Lila moved gracefully between tables. She smiled. "You two are quite the pair," she said to Lila. "How did you meet?" Nathaniel looked up from behind the display case, met Lila's eyes, and said simply, "Through wildflowers on a bench." "What a lovely coincidence," the woman murmured. But Lila shook her head softly, her gaze never leaving Nathaniel. "I don't think it was a coincidence at all," she said. "Some hearts are meant to find each other even through sorrow." That evening, after closing up, Nathaniel and Lila walked the winding path to the bench, a ritual that had quietly become the most sacred part of their day. Twilight settled around them in warm hues of gold and lavender. The park breathed gently. Lila leaned her head against Nathaniel's shoulder as they sat. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" she asked. "If Rachel hadn't said those things, if I'd walked away for good." He paused. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But oddly enough, her lies forced us to face truths we were both avoiding. About Clara, about this place, about what we really needed." Lila tilted her head toward him. "And what's that?" Nathaniel reached for her hand. "To honor the past, without getting trapped in it. To find meaning in what's small and real. To choose love over legacy, connection over ambition." He smiled. "All the things Clara stood for, and all the things you helped me remember." Lila brushed her fingers across the plaque. "I used to feel like I was intruding," she said quietly, "leaving flowers here, not knowing what it meant. It felt like I was trespassing on someone else's memory." "You weren't," Nathaniel said. "You were continuing something sacred. Clara always said love doesn't lessen when it's shared. It multiplies." They placed their bouquet down together, hands brushing in quiet unity. Their ritual had become shared. Not one of mourning, but of presence. The words on the new plaque glinted in the last light, "Where memories meet new beginnings." Lila looked down at the wildflowers between them. "You can't erase the past to start over," she said gently, "but you can learn to live beside it with someone who sees all of you and chooses to stay." In the distance, the cafe's soft window lights glowed like lanterns in the gathering dusk. Inside, photographs told the full story. Clara, smiling beside the bench with wildflowers in hand, Nathaniel and Lila on the cafe's opening day, Greystone Park blooming through every season, and in that quiet moment beneath the sycamore, Nathaniel reached for her hand. They stood, and together, walked forward. Two lives, once strangers now intertwined by something as gentle as a flower left on a forgotten bench. What began as a quiet offering became the thread that stitched together two aching hearts. From the window of her apartment overlooking Greystone Park, Rachel watched them, Nathaniel and Lila walking slowly along the path, bathed in lamplight, shoulder to shoulder, no words needed. She had returned to Seattle briefly, invited to speak at a sustainable architecture summit. Once, the sight below would have stirred envy, regret, all the things she'd lost, or never truly had. But now, something softer settled in her chest. Not sorrow, not bitterness, acceptance. She hadn't lost Nathaniel because Lila was somehow more. She had lost him because he needed someone who could carry his past with grace while still daring to build something new. And that was a kind of love Rachel had never learned to give. Until now. She turned from the window, leaving the scene below to its stillness, and returned to her desk papers scattered with blueprints and green sketches. She was beginning again, and this time, differently. Growth, she had come to learn, often took root in the cracks left by grief like wildflowers blooming through concrete. Delicate, uninvited, unstoppable. Thank you for walking with us through this story, a story not of grand gestures, but of quiet bravery, of seeing beauty in forgotten places, of choosing to love without erasing what came before, of beginning again, not in spite of the past, but because of it. As Nathaniel and Lila discovered, sometimes the smallest act, a flower, a pause, a shared silence can open the door to something far greater than we imagined. And perhaps, in your own life, you've known a moment like that too. A moment when something broken began to mend, when the light returned through an unexpected crack, when a simple kindness changed everything. If this story found a place in your heart, we invite you to stay a while. Subscribe for more stories that remind us we are never truly alone, that healing is real, and that even in the quietest corners, love still grows, just like wildflowers. Some stories don't end, they simply become part of who we are. A quiet bench in a city park, a bouquet of wildflowers, and two souls who learned that love, when shared, doesn't fade, it grows. Nathaniel and Lila's journey reminds us that healing doesn't always come with answers. Sometimes it arrives in silence, in presence, in the courage to begin again. Maybe you've carried your own version of grief. Maybe you've left flowers where no one saw. Or maybe, like Lila, you offered something small that became something extraordinary. Thank you for joining us on this journey of memory, hope, and unexpected connection. If this story touched your heart, please consider giving it a like, sharing it with someone who needs a moment of peace today, and subscribing to our channel for more soulful stories that remind us we're never truly alone. Until next time, keep noticing the quiet beauty, and never stop believing in second chances.